Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the the second book of Corinthians, the fourth chapter, and just some brief historical background before we delve into the text. Corinth had an assembly that Paul personally founded and was invested in. He was a church planter of sorts. He traveled really throughout the Roman Empire, planning assemblies and overseeing them, but because he couldn't be everywhere at once, he'd frequently visit them and communicate to them through what he heard through the grapevine of sorts to correct doctrinal confusions or to chastise members in need of rebuke. So the Corinth city was, by this point, when it was subdued by the Roman Empire, had eclipsed Athens as the commercial and cultural center of Greece, or the Aegean world. And it was a notoriously licentious city, so a lot of the problems that Paul addresses throughout both Corinthians letters pertain to sexual sin, but ultimately this one is more oriented towards heresy. So we're going to hop right into it. Therefore, having this service, even as we receive compassion, we do not lose heart. Now, there is no way that Paul could have done what he did without losing heart, because he went through it all. He went through the fire of the ringer of trials. We read at one point he was, among other things, lashed 39 times for his witness. Now, there's three things that's important for us to extract here. One, God permits trials. Two, God controls trials. And three, God allows trials through which his splendor may be aggrandized. So our suffering is never without purpose as long as we're doing it for the faith. Now, there's a fine line between being persecuted for the faith and just not being liked because you're disagreeable. But if we maintain the integrity of our intentions and the sincerity of our witness, then we can know that we're being persecuted for his name's sake as opposed to our own. But have renounced the secrets of shame, not walking in craftiness, nor falsifying the word of Yahweh, but by the manifestation of the truth, recommending ourselves to every human conscience in the sight of Elohim. Now, the ways of craftiness and deception are the ways of the heretics. They're charlatans and impious impostors who use religion to gain monetarily. Paul worked as a tent maker to support himself in the course of his ministry. He didn't accept any money, although he did permit it, but that's a separate discussion. And recommending ourselves to everyone. Now, this is, I don't want to say duty and obligation of the converted, but the natural response of being the beneficiary of grace is to naturally want to spread it to everywhere. It's not an obligation or duty. It may become that in the course of it when we can anticipate in advance that we're going to be persecuted, but we don't know in advance, short of prayer and prophecy, the specific natures of those persecutions. Yet we trudge on ahead. And even evangelism is a lot like muscles or a garden, in that they atrophy or wither when they're not exercised, and you need to spread it around for anything to grow. And Paul had a mission to spread the whole faith throughout the known world. And indeed, if our good news has been veiled, it has been veiled in those who are perishing. So the way of the authentic witness is one of transparency and sincerity. We don't have anything to hide, so we don't attempt to hide it, but it remains concealed to those who are unable to penetrate it. Now, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 9 through 14, that the carnal, degenerate, and unregenerate mind is unable to have spiritual intuition, but in fact regards it as foolishness. But we ought not to be discouraged from the failures of others to understand, comprehend, or apply our message, so long as we witness it faithfully. As long as we bring the message, the judgment is not on the reception or the response, but the presentation. That's not to discourage us from aiming our efforts. We have to connect with people on their wavelength and meet them halfway, and that's a separate discussion, but we witness Paul using fundamentally different approaches to appeal to Gentiles and Jews, meeting them where they knew. And indeed, in whom the mighty one of this age has blinded the minds of the unbelieving, so that the enlightening of the good news of the esteem of Messiah, who is the likeness of Elohim, does not shine on them. So we understand the mighty one of this age to be alternately referred to as the god of this world, Satan, the adversary, and those who are disabled from comprehending are, without knowing it or not, being manipulated, if not enslaved by him, because we're all made in the likeness of Elohim, Genesis 5:1 and 1:28. So his message should connect to us through the conscious, having that intrinsic element in us. But it can be distorted and corrupted by the intrusion of the adversary. For we do not proclaim ourselves, but Messiah Yahshua, the Master, and ourselves your servants for the sake of Yahshua. Now, the problem with the modern church, I feel, is that there's a lot of celebrities but very few servants. Now, the Master himself modeled the ideal that we are to emulate in the paradoxical principle of servant leadership. Now, the world conditions us to look at servants and leadership as antithetical. He who leads is served, and he who serves is led. But the Messiah upsets the balance and overturns the course by saying that the mark of a true leader is one who devotes himself not to his own aggrandizement, but to the benefit of others, and in a theological context, to the splendor of Yahweh. For Elohim, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," is the one who has shone in our hearts for the enlightening of the knowledge of the esteem of Elohim and the face of Yahshua Messiah. Now this is a reference to Genesis 1, 3, and 4, when Elohim, upon the creative process, he spoke it into existence. He simply said, light, let there be light, and it came out of darkness. Order came out of chaos. Everything in existence, what represented a dramatical departure from what was in pre-existence, of which we have no relatable, tangible model to compare it to, but we can imagine it was nothingness, if not chaotic and disorderly. And we have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the excellence of the power might be of Elohim, and not of us. So the focus in here is not the imperishable vessel, that is us, the humans, but the message, and more macrocosmically, who that message is about, that is the ultimate treasure and priceless commodity that we have to offer. It's not about us, it's about him, 100% of the time. If our ego and conceit, it can get in the way, so that's something, if you see a brother or yourself doing it, it's time to step back and rebuke them or yourselves gently, if possible, for others, but we should generally, as a rule, be our own harshest critics. Being hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Being perplexed, but not in despair. Being persecuted, but not forsaken. Being thrown down, but not destroyed. Always bearing about in the body the dying of the Master Yahshua, that the life of Yahshua might also be manifested in our body. So to paraphrase an atheist, militant, anti-theist, actually, Friedrich Nietzsche, what doesn't kill me can only make me stronger. And this is something that is applicable to the disciple, witness, or evangelist, because we often lose many battles, and but we can never lose the war. Now, that's not to say that the war can't be lost, because the faith is never more than one generation away from extinction. So we have to constantly endeavor to spread the news to anyone and everyone that we can in our path. And the dying of the Master Yahshua, the paradox is that it brings life. It's through his death. And the other paradox of that is that he became the sin punishment, even though he was sinless, so that his righteousness could be imputed, not imparted to us at the judgment. For we, the living, are always delivered to death for the sake of Yahshua, that the life of Yahshua might also be manifest in our mortal flesh. So this is the purpose for which we are brought, ultimately, it seems, at times, near death's door. It's to bring light and life and the positive fruit comes from the negative experience. So we can be discouraged, but we ought never be defeated by the persecution we endure in the course of our mission and ministry. So that death is indeed working in us, but the life in you. So this is the paradox once again: death out of life, life out of death, the reverse, and they're mutually reflective almost. But having the same spirit of faith, according to which it has been written, I believed, therefore I spoke. We also believe, therefore we also speak. Now, if we believe, the natural expression in response to this belief is going to be to express it through others so that they too may believe, because it's not something we want to, the message is not selfishly oriented. It's ultimately about others and in the final analysis about him. So we do, it's only natural. It's not an obligation or duty, evangelism. It should be a natural response. The Father is obeyed, one, because we love him, not because we fear him, although the dynamics of fear are somewhat, the faithful fear are somewhat beyond the range of this discourse. Knowing that he who raised up the Master Yahshua shall also raise up through Yahshua and stand with you. So it is by his resurrection that we are resurrected. He is referred as the first fruit of the resurrection, and because of what he accomplished, he can share it to those who exercise faith in his atonement and come to him in a spirit of faith and repentance. We too may enjoy the fruit of the resurrection. For all this is for your sake, so that grace, having spread through the many, would cause thanksgiving to overflow unto the esteem of Elohim. Again, he stresses that he's doing what he's doing, not for himself, but for others, and ultimately for him, so that they may have cause to be grateful and express that gratitude to the Elohim of whom he witnesses. Therefore we do not lose heart, but even if the outward man is perishing, yet that within is being renewed day by day. So even the physical deterioration that we encounter, or the physical losses, monetary or anything else of the world, tangible material, is ultimately creative destruction paradox. It's strengthening the spirit and ultimately giving it life. For this slight momentary pressure is working for us a far more exceeding and everlasting weight of esteem. So our pain and persecution is an investment with an eternal reward, provided, of course, that we are persecuted for his name's sake and not for our own. But this also reminds us of Romans 8:18, which I can only paraphrase, for I reckon that the suffering we now endure is not worthy to be compared to the splendor we will endure, or not endure, but awaits us. Again, that's a paraphrase. We are not looking on what is seen, but on what is not seen. For what is seen passes away, but what is not seen is everlasting. Now, the things and items of this world are tangible but temporary. They only seem so real because we can touch them, feel them, grasp them, and but they're ultimately a shadow or of an eternal substance. The realer world, the higher metaphysical plane, is in fact the spiritual world in heaven that awaits us. That our earthly life is almost a probationary period through which we may or may not reach that exalted end. But this also raises a question of exercising faith in what can not be seen. Now, Paul personally witnessed the resurrected Messiah and was blinded by the occasion. You can read about it in Acts 9, and heard him speak. But the people of whom he witnessed to were post-mortal ministry disciples of the Messiah. So it's asking them a lot to believe in someone you haven't seen. But it's the definite, if matters of faith could be empirically verified or duplicated in controlled experiments, they would cease to be matters of faith. So that is ultimately the epistemological validity of faith. Now, our postmodern mindsets condition us to regard anything that can't be seen or heard or perceived with the senses as inherently untrue. But theology observes a higher metaphysical plane. And to wrap it up and repeat and reiterate, the things of this world only seem so real but they are tangible but transitory. Thank you so much. See you next time.